Okay, so now in this video we are going to begin category A electrophiles and their reactions with alkyne nucleophiles. So, of course, category A, just like with alkenes, these electrophiles are defined as being strong acids, usually hydrohalic acids like HCl or HBr. So, when a terminal alkyne reacts with a strong acid, it's going to do so in a regioselective manner. And that regioselectivity is a function of the differential substitution pattern on the terminal alkyne, where one carbon is secondary and the other carbon is primary. So, of course, upon reaction with a strong acid, we're going to lead to some carbocation-like intermediate. And alkynes are going to give vinyl cations. So let me show what the structure of a vinyl cation looks like, and then we're going to talk about its instability.